Okay, we're moving into Unit 2 now, and a big topic here is embellishing chords. I'm going to use an example here in just a moment that will illustrate what these are. Here's a definition of it first, though. An embellishing chord is a chord made up of notes that embellish another chord. Well, what are they embellishing? They're going to be embellishing main kinds of harmonic function. So let me pull you over here real quick. Here's the phrase model, the basic phrase model. In this unit, we're going to be adding the predominant in there to help flesh it out and get the full, bigger picture. You might know already that you don't always have a tonic at the end. If you omit the tonic at the end, you have a half cadence. Some phrases just start with tonic and move to the dominant, and that's good enough. If you bring in the tonic at the end, you're going to get PACs, IACs, different kinds of authentic cadences. There's more closure involved when you do that, and so it's meaningful that you show the complete thing in the model. The model shows this is how you get a complete statement in music, but knowing that you have omitted something that's part of the model helps to say, you know what, this is not all the way done. I've left something off, and that's important to the way we hear the phrase. When you end on a dominant, you know it's not over yet. Some more music will follow, and closure will come at a later point. It's also possible to leave this out, as we've been doing with the basic phrase model. The basic phrase model does not include a predominant chord, a predominant functioning chord. What this means is a chord that precedes the dominant and helps lead into it. These are the main functions that a chord can play within a phrase, and we'll have a lot more to say about these. But when we talk about embellishing chords, which is our topic right now, we're talking about chords that somehow elaborate on these basic functions. Most basic, tonic and dominant, and we're going to be adding predominant. Now, let's add some chords to the mix that are, yes, they're embellishing, they're not embellishing tones. We're used to that. We're used to thinking, okay, here's a tone, a particular note that's passing. Here's a particular note that is neighboring, say. All those are embellishing tones, but now we're talking about an entire chord that's made up of notes that embellish another chord. So the entire chord is less stable than the things around it and can be viewed as embellishing because of the kinds of motion going on. So here's an example. This is from Beethoven. Actually, let me just show you the score that you want to be looking at. Beethoven Violin Sonata in D major. This is Opus 12, number 1. And you'll want to listen to this. But let's turn, what I've done on the board, turn to the board and let's look at what the outer parts do. I've simplified the outer parts for us. I've used big note heads for main notes. I have not chosen the main note here, so we'll do that together. Okay, so here's the bass line with no embellishment. I've just copied that on down. I've given you the Roman numerals down below. Now I'm going to assert that this chord, this 5-4-3, is way different than this chord over here. This 5 that comes at the end creates a half cadence. It is stable. It's the goal of the phrase. It's in root position, which contributes to its stability. This chord is in the middle, and in its context, in the middle of the phrase, in this context, it is embellishing. Yes, it's a dominant, but it doesn't have nearly the stability of this 5 that comes at the end. Part of it, a main component to its instability, is the fact that it's inverted. It's got a chordal 7th in there, it's inverted, but most important, look at the kind of motion that occurs in both of the outer parts. You're just passing through this chord. Yes, it's a chord, but you can see how you could get the notes of this chord, even the inner voices, which I've left out, through passing motion in the individual parts. So in the bass, we're stepping up. That's passing motion. In the top part, the main melody, we're stepping up to that A, F sharp G A. That's passing motion. Now I'm not going to say that's a passing tone. It's part of a chord. It is a chord tone. But the whole chord is less stable, and because of that, we can say that it's embellishing. Whenever we have a main function, in this case tonic, and we say, hey, that chord is being embellished by some other chord, we'll take that main chord, the chord that's being embellished, and show it at a lower level. And then for any chord that we're going to say is embellishing, we'll say how it's embellishing with a symbol right below it. So notice it breaks down into 3 levels here. We've got the Roman numerals and figures. Then we have, for any embellishing chord, a symbol to show how it's embellishing. And then down below, we'll write, well, what's being embellished? What's the main thing going? And what I'm saying by these symbols, we've got tonic stretched out for a couple measures, but it's embellished by a non-tonic chord. You know, what's a 5 doing here? If there's a 5, we're going to have to explain how it can be part of a tonic expansion, a stretching out of the tonic. This symbol says how that's occurring. Sometimes we're not going to have passing motion in both parts. There'll be a mix. Maybe it's a neighboring motion up top. If this had gone F sharp, G, back to F sharp, that would be neighboring motion. But we'd still use passing if the bass is passing. So as a general rule, as a solid rule, we want to say if the bass motion exhibits a certain kind of motion, we're going to use that same kind of motion to label the entire chord. Always use the bass motion to label the embellishing chord. This is a passing 5-4-3. Listen to how it sounds. I'll play it at the keyboard. In the actual music, it's going to leap down. Dee, da, 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 ba, da. And I'm taking these leaps as leaps within the chord, arpeggiation through the chord, but the main note is being this. You're going to hear another embellishment here when you listen to the actual recording. I'm leaving it out because that is not a chord tone. You're leaping to it, and then you're stepping to resolve. So this is an incomplete neighbor. Now this is embellishment too. They are chord tones, but they are embellishing. We call them chordal leaps. They're leaps within the chord, but they're attached to one main note. All right, so I'm going to play the main notes from that so you can hear how that sounds. Ah, shoot, I have to edit that, huh? And you definitely hear the drive that runs through it. Now let me play the whole thing and see how different it sounds when you land on that final dominant. The root position helps a great deal. Set it as a goal. Picking certain notes out of here as main notes. And I think you'll agree with me that this note here does not sound like the main thing going, even though it's the root. And I think the reason is because this one is so clear cut. Once you get to this chord, the 1 chord, you need this as the chord tone and not this. So this is a special note. You're leaping, you're stepping, that's incomplete neighbor. Not a chord tone. These 2 are chord tones. And I'm going to pick this one as the main one, so I'll do that same bigger note value to help show it. So it's embellished in 2 ways. Incomplete neighboring motion and chordal leap motion within the 1 chord. Let me back up to this one and treat it in a similar way. Now, I could have taken the A and just said, hey, that's more A, right? And that's a chord tone, it's a main note. But I feel like, to be consistent, I'm probably going to hear this as dum ba da dum be dum ba dum ba dum ba dum. It's like that note needs to resolve, that note needs to resolve. In each case, you're moving to a more stable note. Ba-dum, ba-dum. And if we're going to perform it that way, we can reflect it that way. Now, see, the thing is, both of these are chord tones. And I'm picking one because of the way I'm performing it. Now, that's not an incomplete neighbor, that's a chord tone. Yes, it's true, and I'm saying that's the main note. This is a chord tone. It's true, but I'm going to pick that one as the main note. A general rule here is that the framework note, the first species framework that I'm going to pull out from this, is stepwise. Notice how all those stepwise connections come out from that. Let me go ahead and do this as well. Again, a choice. I've got two notes and I'm picking one. All right, now what do I gain from all this? Showing the big note heads and saying other notes are all embellishing. Well, what I'm doing is by peeling back all this embellishment, I am left with a first species framework. And so you can see how this connects with Unit 1 material. In Unit 1, we were writing first species. A lot of times, melodies are way more ornate. We're starting in Unit 2 now to write more ornate melodies. And that is no longer first species, but the first species framework is still there. Third, I'm just doing the outer voice main notes here, the framework notes. Notice they all form thirds here. That's good first species counterpoint. Now here's a dissonance. This is a tritone. I'll use TT for that. And it has to resolve. Now in the original conception of first species counterpoint, you don't have dissonance. We need to adjust it to handle later styles though. For this whole species approach was a Renaissance thing. It started way back and was used most famously by a fellow named Fuchs, who was trying to show how Palestrina's style works. So that's for a different style period. Once we allow dissonance like this, dissonance that is involved within a chord. This is a 5-6-5 chord. That's the chordal third. That's the chordal seventh. That chordal seventh creates a dissonance, and that's what our textbook does as well. It allows you to, in first species, to use dissonance if it's chordal dissonance. In other words, if it's dissonance that's formed between notes of a chord. So with a little tweak like that, allowing chordal dissonance in the mix, this also fits the bill for first species, an adjusted first species. And notice, we've got dissonance treated carefully with a resolution. And we also, and look at how that sort of carries over and then resolves and makes it more dramatic, brings in the F sharp in a more special way. But notice where the perfect interval comes at the end. That's part of its stability there. Okay, so we're using this example to connect back with some things that we already know. We know how to write good first species counterpoint. We can embellish it in this way, but we can also be very aware of what chords we're implying. If we reserve a root position 5 for the end, it'll sound appropriate for the end. Just like when we pick a perfect interval at the end, reserving that perfect sound for a point of arrival, it makes it sound like you're truly done. In the middle of a phrase, we use imperfect intervals, and now you can do something else to enhance the mobility of the middle of a phrase. You can create instability by the position of the chords that you're implying. Here we've got a 5-4-3, an inversion of 5, which is less stable. And because of the motion in the outer parts, it sounds like a passing chord. Remember, we just name it because of whatever's going on in the bass. We have another one here, and now you know what to do with it. It's less stable than this one, so it's probably embellishing. All you need to look at now is, well, what's its context, and how is it embellishing that context? Well, it's sandwiched between ones, so I'm going to say, hey, wait, this tonic doesn't end here, it goes further. And you carry that line on, say, that's the arrival, that's the change. This is a significant change to the dominant. All these other changes were kind of like, yeah, you're spinning your wheels, but the entire car hasn't moved anywhere. So motion, it's true, but on a small scale, and you haven't really progressed anywhere. Here's where the car really does shift and go somewhere new. That's real travel. This is a bunch of motion without a lot of momentum built up in the larger sense. Okay, so what are we going to name this? Well, we use the bass motion. Leap, step. Well, that's an incomplete neighbor kind of motion, so we'll name this chord an incomplete neighbor chord. Again, we're taking this idea from what we learned in the last unit, Unit 1. We know how to label non-chord tones. We take that same thinking, and now we're applying it to an entire chord. quick procedure for you then. Once you've analyzed like this, Roman numerals and figures, look especially for dominant chords that are in inversion. And if they are probably not points of closure. They're probably embellishing. They're probably somewhere in the middle of a phrase. Get the bigger perspective, where's the cadence, and go back to all those places where you found a chord in inversion like this, a dominant in inversion, and say, okay, does it work in this context to view it as embellishing something else, tonic? If that seems true, then go on to say, well, what kind of embellishment does it provide? And for that, you just need to look at the bass. Use your ear in all these steps to say, okay, does it sound embellishing? Okay, and your label then, what you put down, will come right in between these two other layers, the Roman numerals and the basic functions. And again, you'll use the bass motion to decide what symbol you want to use there.